At our number 10 spot, we have booby traps. This war was infamous for Vietnam's use of guerrilla warfare on the US troops, but this came largely due to the fact that Americans invaded, locked, and loaded. Despite what many believe, the US outgunned and outmanned the communists, so they needed to find other ways to fight them. And their response was these intricate booby traps. These things were devastating, and just by the looks of it, I understand why US troops' morales were dropped completely down the drain after running into these. The jungle terrain was hard enough having to deal with hiding soldiers and underground tunnels, but imagine walking and running into some of these traps. Some include the punji sticks, which were these sharpened bamboo coated in either poison, feces, or even urine, which could cause immediate infection if stabbed. Another one is the cartridge trap. When soldiers stepped on this trap, a nail acting as a firing pin shoots bullets straight up at the victim. We also have the mace, which is a tripwire trap that triggers a 40-pound spiked ball that swings from a tree and gets stuck onto its victims. These are only a small list of the booby traps contained within these dense jungles. I feel like I should make a top 10 on this, but if you guys are interested to see, here are some other traps. Terrifying, right? At number 9 spot, we have Operation Wandering Soul. The sounds coming from the Vietnam War definitely ranks one of the highest in terms of pure horror. With the Viet Cong hiding in the dense jungles, nowhere to be seen, Americans knew that they needed to bring their morale down without the use of firearms. So in the middle of the night, they would commence Operation Wandering Soul. This is a way for Americans to demoralize the Viet Cong by playing eerie sounds and altered voices on speakers. These sounds were supposed to mimic a wandering soul because in Vietnamese culture, if a proper burial is not done, the soul of the deceased will wander the earth as a malevolent spirit. And during the Vietnam War, many soldiers didn't get a proper burial. The most famous of their recordings was named Ghost Tape Number 10, and the best way to explain it is just to play it for you guys. At number 8 spot, we have Agent Orange. With the jungle being an issue for American soldiers, they decided to use a controversial weapon known as Agent Orange. I warn you, this one is pretty cruel. Agent Orange was a herbicide mixture which contained a dangerous chemical known as dioxin. For those who don't know, dioxin is extremely toxic and can cause skin lesions, developmental problems, immune system damage, and can cause cancer. They estimate that around 3 million Vietnamese people had been affected by Agent Orange during the war, with a recorded of up to 150,000 children born with serious birth defects due to this chemical. Other than the lives this chemical took, the worst part about this was that the dioxin could remain in the soils for decades. This has caused Agent Orange to have detrimental effects to this day. After seeing its destructive power, the US decided to ban Agent Orange in 1971. They took it to the Johnston Atoll and destroyed the last one in 1978. At our number 7 spot, we have My Lai Massacre. This could possibly be one of America's worst war crimes they have ever committed, so it's pretty dark just for the warning. On March 16, 1968, a platoon of US soldiers brutally massacred a total up to 347 unarmed civilians at My Lai. They were told inside that Viet Cong were in the area, but when they arrived there, they weren't there. Despite no sign of hostility, Lieutenant William Calley gave the orders for them to open fire on the villagers. The victims included men, women, children, and even infants. After they violated and mutilated the villagers, they went on to burn the village along with slaughtering all of their livestock. It was a complete war crime. It wasn't until an army pilot named Hugh Thompson was walking when he noticed bodies and bodies of civilians as he approached the gunfire. But as he approached the gunfire, he noticed that it was his own comrade shooting. In a change of events, Hugh gave them the orders to stop or he would open fire on them. A total of 26 soldiers were charged with criminal offenses, but only William Calley would be convicted and found guilty of taking the lives of 22 villagers. He was given a life sentence. This event will remain a huge stain on the US military for a long time. At a number 6 spot, we have the Ace of Spades. Another example of psychological warfare done by the US was the Ace of Spades. And yes, I'm talking about the playing card. So for background info, the US Airborne Division used to put an Ace of Spades on their helmet for good luck. Fast forward to the Vietnam War and the US soldiers made it a tradition to leave an Ace of Spades on the helmets of deceased Vietnamese soldiers. Soon the card would be associated with death to both the Vietnamese and the Americans. Eventually, as more Viet Cong saw this happening, their morale would go down and the Americans knew this. So Charlie Company asked the US playing card company to supply them with crates filled with the Ace of Spades cards, which were labeled as Bicycle Secret Weapon upon arrival. And they used all these cards and they dropped them all over Vietnamese villages and jungles to frighten them. The Americans would continue to use this to taunt them by keeping it on their helmet as an anti-peace sign. This card would be later known as the Death Card. Right in the hump of our list, we have napalm. The Vietnam War had its fair share of destructive weapons, but nothing comes close to napalm, which would have been the worst weapon used in a war since the atomic bomb. Napalm, in simple terms, is basically liquid fire or a firebomb fuel gel mixture. It would often have a gelling powder composed of naphthalene and palmitate mixed with gasoline to form a sticky combustible substance. substance. Its sticky nature is the reason why it was so devastating when it released. The substance would stick onto its victims all while burning them alive, or at least causing 4th or 5th degree burns. The area napalm can cover up to 2,500 square yards, which would be completely engulfed in fire. The reason for these bombs in the first place was to support ground troops and to demoralize the enemy. Burning alive has got to be one of the worst ways to go, and seeing this fire would literally be seeing hell on earth. It eventually got banned in 1980 by the United Nations and listed as a war crime. Glad to know this one is gone, but the fact we got to see its powers is terrifying for the future. At number 4 spot, we have the AK-47 over the M16. During the war, American troops would abandon their American-owned M16 assault rifles to use the Viet Cong's AK-47 instead. This was a reason because the M16 was just not as reliable as the AK-47. First, the US changed their ammunition sizes without notifying, and it caused a lot of these guns to jam at pretty random times, which you could imagine would be pretty inconvenient in a gunfight. Second, the M16 couldn't be handled in jungle terrain. It would regularly jam when mud seeped into the gun. I mean, let's compare the two. The AK-47 is a 7.62mm gas-operated assault rifle with the capability to shoot up to 600 rounds per minute. It's claimed to be the most powerful due to the fact it doesn't break or even jam or even overheat. I mean, I don't even need to mention the M16, it has nothing compared to the AK-47. At number 3 spot, we have the Coochie tunnels. Deep inside the jungles were not only booby traps, but a system of underground tunnels for the Viet Cong to hide and move around unnoticed. These were known as the Coochie tunnels. These were a network of underground tunnels stretching more than 124 miles long. Although these tunnels were known internationally from the Vietnam War, Vietnamese did this well before, back in the 1940s during the War for Independence from the French. However, it wasn't until the Vietnam War where the tunnels would be dug for miles, with reports saying that the tunnels travel from the outskirts of Saigon all the way to the Cambodian border. These tunnels were by far anywhere near safe. Not only did you have to worry about the tunnels collapsing due to the poor construction of it, there would be snakes and scorpions and other booby traps inside of these tunnels. It said that 45,000 Vietnamese men and women passed away defending these tunnels during the war. At number 2 spot, we have the massacre at Hue. Hue was one of the longest and bloodiest bouts during the Vietnam War, lasting a total of 26 days. During that time, up to 6,000 civilians and prisoners of war were abused, tortured, and executed at random. The Viet Cong believed this to be a cleansing of the area to anyone who opposed the rule and those who were invading their country. This battle was part of the Tet Offensive, which is when North Vietnam launched a grand-scale assault on every city in South Vietnam. The Viet Congs had a total of 80,000 troops ready before this assault, and despite the Americans knowing about this prior, they were still caught off guard. At a number 1 spot, we have Welcome with Flowers. The earliest Americans participating in the Vietnam War worked for the Office of Strategic Services, which served as the CIA's forerunner. As early as 1954, they were assisting the French and Southern governments of Saigon. Marines made their first official ground landing in Da Nang in 1965, beginning the first formal ground operation. Instead of a D-Day invasion, local women and flowers were welcomed to the troops. This would forever be eerie because of what happened following this event. The Vietnam War was brutal for both sides, and this side of friendliness is so uncharacteristic of the time. Who knows, the Vietnamese girls who put the flowers on the US soldiers could have been the future victims of their firearms, making this one the top of our list. Coming at a number 10 spot, we have the Battle of Cold Harbor. Said to be one of the most haunted battlefields in the United States, it was here that over 150,000 men fought a long, gruesome battle, which ended up claiming the lives of 15,000 of them. As the war finished, it was reported that the lack of medical assistance led to dugouts being crammed with both the living and the dead, and those who passed away couldn't even get proper burials. The conditions of the battlefield made this place a living hell for those who had to fight in it, and now it's reported that those who visit the area experience paranormal occurrences, such as smelling the distinct scent of burned gunpowder or a fog that would appear and disappear in the area, which could be resembling the thick gun smoke from the past battle. Other people report hearing the cries and the screaming of dying soldiers waiting for someone to bury them properly. Restless souls are scattered throughout the park, which is why it makes sense that people get an overwhelming sense of sorrow and fear when they walk on the field. Coming at number 9, we have the Clark Air Base Hospital. This is one of the few places deemed to be haunted, not just in the Philippines, but in the whole world, according to the Ghost Hunters International. Season 1, episode 20, named Unknown Soldiers, if you guys want to check out the episode. The hospital was used during World War II and the Vietnam War, and it also served as an asylum to the wounded and the dying American soldiers. This is why many people around the area claimed it was the most haunted place in the Philippines. It's said that the trauma and countless deaths from those conflicts have left their mark on the spirit's presence in the hospital. The place is currently abandoned, which kind of gives it this more supernatural look to it, but it said that if you visit the hospital and sleep within 8 hours after the visit, you'll experience extreme nightmares and even intense lucid dreaming for a whole entire week. Number 8. Napalm. The Vietnam War had its fair share of destructive weapons, but nothing came close to napalm, which could have been the worst weapon to be used in a war since the atomic bomb. Napalm in simple terms is basically liquid fire or firebomb fuel gel mixture. It often used to have a gelling powder composed of naphthalene and palmitate mixed with gasoline to form a sticky combustible substance. Its sticky nature is the whole reason why it's so devastating, because when it was released, the substance would stick onto its victims all while burning them alive or at least causing them 4th or 5th degree burns. The area napalm can cover is up to 2,500 square yards, which could be completely engulfed in fire. The reason for these bombs in the first place was to support ground troops and to demoralize the enemy. I mean, burning alive has got to be one of the worst ways to go, and seeing this fire would truly be like seeing hell on earth. It eventually got banned in 1980 by the United Nations and listed as a war crime. Glad to see this one is gone, but the fact that we got to see its powers is truly terrifying for what comes next in the future. Number 7. The Belitz Hospital. This scary looking military hospital is located in Belitz, Germany. The hospital is situated near Berlin in this little town called Belitz. It was originally built at the beginning of the 20th century to treat tuberculosis, with the entire facility comprising around 60 buildings. And for its time there, it had many deaths coming from the illness. It was then used as a military hospital during the World Wars, and was also used for German experiments during World War II. During the final days of the war, the facility was captured by the Soviet forces and became their biggest military treatment center outside of Russia until 1994. Small parts of it are still in use for neurological research and treatment, but most are left abandoned. Its last reported use was around 1994 to 1995. Now the place looks downright creepy. With its dark hallways and its peeling paints, this is a place you definitely don't want to go. Number 6. The Sinchon Massacre. Now before I get this one started, this one is all up for speculation. North Korea said this happened while the US said it was falsified. And we all know about the lies that North Korea produces. But forget about that, we just care about the North Korean side today. They claim that a mass murder took place in 1950 during the Korean War. In the town of Sinchon, American soldiers supposedly took the lives of over 35,000 civilians in the course of 52 days. If this was true, this would make it one of the most deadliest massacres in all of history, but that's if. Now this event is memorialized in the Sinchon Museum of American War Atrocity. Yup, there's a museum on horrible violent acts, and some of the paintings in here are pretty disturbing, so I'll just give you guys a little bit of a snippet. In the hump of our list, we have Operation Wandering Soul. The sounds coming from the Vietnam War definitely ranks one of the highest in terms of pure horror. With the Viet Cong hiding in the dense jungles, nowhere to be seen, Americans knew they had to bring their morale down without the use of firearms. So in the middle of the night, they would commence Operation Wandering Soul. This was a way for Americans to demoralize the Viet Cong by playing these eerie sounds and altered voices on these loud speakers. These sounds were supposed to mimic a wandering soul. Because of Vietnamese culture, if a proper burial is not done, the soul of the deceased will wander the earth as a malevolent spirit, and during the Vietnam War, many soldiers didn't get proper burial. The most famous of the recordings was named Ghost Tape Number 10, and the best way to explain it is just to play it for you guys. Number 4. Bloody Bucket Bridge. During the time of the Civil War, an African-American couple moved and settled into Wauchula, Florida. The woman worked as a midwife and she was pretty content with her situation. As time went on, the wife started to act unstable, and it was all due to the memory of her own child being stripped from her during the Civil War. Haunted by the event, she took it on her own to suffocate babies as they were being born. And what's worse is that she told the parents that it was a stillbirth. Then it said that she would take the remains of the baby to her husband, who would help her grind them up and place them in a bucket. Later, she would take these buckets to the bridge and dump them over into the water, hence Bloody Bucket Bridge. People claim that if you visit the bridge on a full moon night, the water will appear red in color, looking like the blood of the baby she took. Number 3, Genghis Khan. If you don't think Genghis Khan is a scary guy, you're just privileged you don't live in his time period. First of all, he is responsible for the deaths of over 40 million people, and he is arguably the greatest military leader of all time because of it. The Khan regime at its peak covered over 9 million square miles of territory, which ranged from Central Asia to places as far as Poland and Korea. The reason he was able to take over this much area was largely due to the way he commanded his army, their ruthlessness, tactic, and extraordinary speed. In one example, Khan's son-in-law was killed by a stray arrow during 1221. He then took his whole army and attacked the city of Nishapur, which is modern day Iran, and it was said that he killed everybody in the city, which was believed to be 1.75 million people in a single hour. The victims were beheaded and their skulls were piled up in a large pyramid in the middle of the town. His campaign would prove to be more evil than death alone, but we don't need to mention anything else. Besides destroying entire civilization, Genghis Khan's conquest may have also helped to spread the bubonic plague all across Asia and Europe, thus killing another 75 to 200 million people. Glad to know we don't have this type of guy around today. Number 2, the anti-tank battlefield. Combine advanced technology with unstructured tactics and poor decision making, and you have the Battle of Antietam, otherwise known as the bloodiest single day in American history. For those who don't know, this is the battle that wounded or took the lives of 23,000 people. And remember, that's in one single day. The iconic Bloody Lane is the spot where both sides met and fought for their lives. It was a sunken part of the road, and considering it was where the most activity was, it's understandable that many bodies were stacked on this road, hence the name Bloody Lane. Gunfire and the smell of gunpowder have been reported in the area even when there's no one around to this day. The most convincing of the reports is some of Baltimore schoolboys who walked Bloody Lane and heard singing out in the fields. They said it sounded like a chant or even a Christmas song decked the halls. Number 1, the Nottingham Road Hotel. The railway hotel was first completed in 1891 and soon blooming socially, and then it also served as a popular stop for British soldiers during the Boer War. Today, the railway hotel has now been named the Nottingham Road Hotel, and a lot of things happened at this hotel. This hotel is supposedly haunted by a ghost named Charlotte. Charlotte was a beautiful lady who served the man during the war, so one day she supposedly fell in love with the soldier, and then he ended up passing away. A deeply saddened Charlotte then threw herself off the balcony, leading to her demise. So now she haunts the hotel and has been spotted by many guests over the years. The balcony she was staying at and jumped off of was at room 10, and this is where most of the paranormal activity is said to have happened. Guests in the room report seeing her on the balcony still, and sometimes they would claim that she would fold their clothes for them. Sightings of Charlotte are common, with even surveillance showing a ghostly white woman appearing in the bars, around the corridors, and even down the stairs. At our number 10 spot, we have Ivan the Terrible. To get a nickname like this, you already know he must have done something very bad. I mean, his name ain't Ivan the Humble. Born in 1530 to Grand Prince Vasily III of Moscow, he became an instant representative for the Rurik dynasty. It wasn't until shortly after his father would pass away, when he was only at the age of 3, causing him to take the position of Grand Prince of Moscow. 5 years later, his mother passed away, which only added more fuel into this little boy's heart. Then on January 1547, Ivan was crowned the first Tsar and Grand Prince of all of Russia. At first, he was doing very well. He improved military service, strengthened church affairs, and introduced extensive self-government. Except during these turbulent times, he was escalating his own paranoia, and his mental health would deteriorate as more issues would be piled up. In November 1581, he attacked his pregnant daughter-in-law, which caused a miscarriage. This also stirred up a famous encounter with him and his son, where he struck his own son in the head with a staff until his skull was broken, killing him. That's not all. He once blinded the architect who created the St. Basil Cathedral to ensure he would never design anything as beautiful again. During 1560 as well, Ivan's paranoia led him to believe the citizens of Novgorod were committing treason. So what did he do? He went on to massacre them, killing around 2,000 to 27,000 people. Ivan even decided to sew the Archbishop of Novgorod into a bearskin and then let dogs hunt and kill him. He also had 8 wives, but that's not so scary, kinda nice, am I right? At number 9 spot, we have Vlad the Impaler, another unpleasant nickname on our list. First of all, he is responsible for the deaths of around 80,000 people, but for some historians that number pushes to around 100,000. Out of those people he apparently killed, around 20,000 of them were impaled. No wonder he got this name. Many people have him as inspiration for Dracula for his bloodthirsty ways. For example, after his family passed away, he decided to hold a banquet and invited hundreds of members of all of his rivals' families. So when he had them all over, he then all had them stabbed, and their still twitching bodies were impaled on these spikes. And another time, when he retreated from a battle, he ordered 20,000 defeated Ottomans to be impaled on wooden stakes. This was such a horrifying sight that when the Sultan Mahmud II saw the lines of bodies, he quickly retreated retreated back to Constantinople. Regardless of his bloodthirsty motives, he remains a national hero in Romania. His victorious campaigns against the Ottoman forces, which protected both the Wallachia and Europe, have won him praise as a military leader. So good or bad, he did kill a lot of people, but then again, they were impaled brutally, so I don't know what to say about that one. At number 8 spot, we have Phalaris. This leader created one of history's worst torture devices of all time. The brazen bull was designed by Greek tyrant Phalaris, who reigned in ancient Greece from 5070 to 554 BC. He's most famous for his cruelty, and he would literally use the funds of his own citizens to create more torture devices. The craziest thing about his brazen bull was the fact that he asked a designer slash builder named Perillus to create it, but it was said that Phalaris used him as the first victim to be executed in it. Talk about a backstab. This torture device was a bronze bull that would basically roast victims alive, and to make things worse, before the victims were placed into the bull, they were forced to have their tongues cut out and their hands bound. As the victims burned alive, their screams would appear as if the bull was alive. At number 7 spot, we have Emperor Caligula. This guy was definitely the craziest Roman emperor I've read about. If you had a bloodthirsty tyrant and a sexual deviant, you would have Emperor Caligula. After being born in the year 12, he would go on to become Roman emperor from 37 to 41 CE. When he first took authority, it was noticeable that something terrible was wrong about him. Caligula had incestuous relations with his 3 sisters and engaged in plenty of intimate group sessions during his reign. And on top of that, he forced senators to bring their wives and their daughters to his palace, where he would convince them to do very inappropriate things for him and others in authority. Then, to become a full menace, Caligula would brag about his sexual performances right in front of the husbands of the women he slept with. This guy was a player, a menace, and a ladies' man all in one. In a pursuit for wealth, he would stage trials of innocent people in order to confiscate their estates, while he gained large quantities of money and luxuries for himself. Eventually, things started to go bad. I mean, bad leader, bad place. Makes sense. However, the last straw was after famine and bankruptcy hit. It was here where he planned to move to Egypt to live as a sun god. This eventually triggered his murder in January 41 AD. At number 6 spot, we have Joseph Stalin.
Stalin was born in 1878 and was the infamous leader for the USSR during the 1930s.
Despite their success against Germany to end the war, Stalin was far from being innocent from any war crimes himself. He is indirectly responsible for around 30 to 40 million deaths, though that number tends to hop around a lot. Out of those millions, many of them happen to be in the Soviet Union itself. For example, in 1932 and 1933, millions of Ukrainians were killed in a man-made famine, which was engineered by none other than Joseph Stalin. Then in 1936, Stalin initiated the Great Purge, aiming to rid the Communist Party of some of the biggest detractors and rivals of the group. Hundreds of thousands of people initially were arrested by Stalin's NKVD, which was the secret police at the time. Many were executed or sent to the Gulag, which, for those who don't know, were these terrible, harsh labor camps where many people would pass away. Also, he organized a series of mass executions, which totaled around 22,000 people, consisting of Polish officers and POWs. This is known as the Katyn Massacre, and it was done for the sole purpose to ruin the future of the Polish military. As I mentioned previously, he was responsible for the deaths of his own people, which is probably the worst crime he ever committed. Historians believed he killed over 20 million of his own people, making him one of the most evil rulers to ever exist on this list. In the Humber list, we have Mao Zedong. This guy was terrible, but also good, depending on the way you want to look at it. To set the baselines, he created the People's Republic of China, introducing communism for the first time. This is where a lot of controversial things happen. In the purges of the early 1950s, millions of wealthy peasants, intellectuals, and saboteurs were killed. Then came the Great Leap Forward from 1958 to 1962, one of the most insane experiments in social engineering ever. Private plots were abolished and communal kitchens were introduced. This experiment turned out to be a disaster, which ended up killing over 45 million Chinese people. Then in 1966, he launched the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution, in which millions of people were persecuted and suffered public humiliation, imprisonment, torture, hard labor, and even execution. Except there was some good he did. Despite killing millions, I know, still terrible. Mao turned China from a third world country into a first world country with their improved international relations. As well, Mao united China together, and if we really think about it, his high death toll is because of an accident. I know, still terrible, but not as terrible. At number 4 spot, we have Queen Maria I of Portugal. Born in 1734, Queen Maria exhibits some eyebrow-raising behavior prior to her husband/uncle's death in 1786, but it was that sad event that really set her on the road to madness. When her eldest son and only daughter passed away as well, Maria's already fragile mental state went completely downhill. The religious fanatic became convinced she was going to hell and reported visions of her deceased father's blackened corpse being tormented by demons. Visitors to her apartment could complain that they were tired by her constant screaming and wailing. I mean, she didn't kill anyone, so that's not a terrible thing. Except in February 1792, she was deemed mentally insane and was treated by Francis Willis, the same physician who attended George III of the United Kingdom. So this is probably the least evil monarch on this list, but her mental deterioration and effects definitely made it difficult for the people at the time. At number 3 spot, we have Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein was Iraq's ruler from 1979 until 2003. His sick need for power, ultimate authority, no matter the cost in human blood, was a consistent theme throughout his entire reign. Saddam was well known for employing terror against his own people, including the use of mustard gas and nerve gas to subdue the Kurds. To mention some of his horrible actions, in 1980, he launched an attack on Iran. The battle ended in a stalemate with over 1 million people passing away, many including innocent women and children. Then he attacked Kuwait in 1990, igniting the first Gulf War and killing another 85,000 people. Following that war, uprisings killed around 150,000 civilians. The list goes on with the amount of attacks and other war crimes he committed on innocent people. Except in 2003 he was captured in Iraq, and then in 2006 he was famously sentenced to death by hanging. At number 2 spot, we have Pol Pot. Born in 1925, Pol Pot was a political leader for the communist Khmer Rouge government that led Cambodia from 1975 to 1979. His goal was to wipe out all sorts of Western influences in Cambodia and create his own country based on his personal likings. He wanted to Cambodia back to its roots by advocating for more grassroots farmers and laborers. This basically made educated and professional people number 1 on his hit list. One of his first decisions was to evacuate Cambodia's urban areas. This displaced millions of people, resulting in a complete life change, as many of them were forced to work in labor camps as farmers. It was pretty bad because if you refused to do this type of work, this would place you in a detention center and would give you 2 options: comply or die. The Khmer Rouge also had their own torture manual, which was used in the form of interrogation. It was said that 1.5 to 2 million Cambodians were killed during Pol Pot's rule. At a number 1 spot, we have Genghis Khan. What did you expect? So he takes our number 1 spot for the most obvious reasons ever. He is responsible for the deaths of over 40 million people. Genghis Khan of Mongolia is arguably the greatest military leader of all time. The Khan regime at its peak covered over 9 million square miles of territory, which ranged from Central Asia to places as far as Poland and Korea. The reason he was able to take over this much area was largely due to the way he commanded his army, their ruthlessness, tactic, and extraordinary speed. In one example, Khan's son-in-law was killed by a stray arrow during 1221. He then took his whole army and attacked the city of Nishapur, which is modern-day Iran, and it was said that he killed everybody in the city, which is believed to be 1.75 million people, in a single hour. The victims were beheaded and their skulls were piled up in a large pyramid. His campaign would prove to be more evil than death alone, but we don't need to mention anything else. He was so cruel that even cats and dogs would also fall victim to his strength. Besides destroying entire civilizations, Genghis Khan's conquest may have helped to spread the bubonic plague across Asia and Europe as well, thus killing another 75 to 200 million people. Glad to know we don't have this type of guy around today. Coming in at number 10, we have the fake town. Sitting in the DMZ, which is the area between North and South Korea, this village was named the Peace Village. The village was built with the point to entice potential South Korean defectors, and they did this by showing through propaganda videos that this place is thriving economically. Americans and other witnesses believe this town is completely abandoned, however, and that it's a setup. Just like their infamous Rug Young Hotel, which is a completely empty 105-story building, this town has their own concrete buildings with hollow insides. They also claim that electricity runs on a timer at nights to show even more false activity and to convince us more. The regime will even send maintenance employees to act as if work is being done there, when in reality, nothing is being done there.
Now coming in at our number 9 spot, the cannibals of North Korea. There were times and places in North Korea in the mid-1990s when a horrible food shortage wiped out 10% of the population. It wasn't unusual for people to sometimes randomly disappear. People were passing away by the thousands, maybe millions. But dark rumors started to spread. A woman in North Korea had whispered to a friend, "Don't buy any meat if you don't know where it comes from," and she later defected. Fear of cannibalism, like the shortage supposedly causing it, spread. People avoided the meat in street-side soup vendors and warned children not to be alone at night. At least one person in North Korea was arrested and executed for eating human flesh. Someone that had defected and fled to China had said, "People are going insane with hunger. They even kill and eat their own infants." This kind of thing is happening in many places. North Korea's shortage is over, but the stories of desperate men and women driven so insane by starvation that they consume their own children have resurfaced. Asia Press published a report alleging thousands recently passed of starvation in a North Korea province.
At our number 8 spot, we have Otto Warmbier. I mentioned him in the past videos, but I couldn't have a true horror story from North Korea without this infamous case of the 22-year-old college student Otto Warmbier. Otto Warmbier was a student from UCLA and decided it was time to go somewhere outside of the box. He then went on a trip to North Korea through a Chinese company named Young Pioneer Tours. In the hotel he was staying at, there was a forbidden floor, but he went there anyway and stole a political poster off the wall. This was all because his Methodist church in Ohio wanted him to do it. During his confession speech on February 2016, he said this:
"I have been very impressed by the Korean government's humanitarian treatment of severe criminals like myself, and of their very fair and square legal procedures in the DPR Korea."
Then in March that same year, he was convicted and sentenced to 15 years of hard labor. Negotiations happened, but it wasn't until June 2017 when North Korea released Otto, except he was in a coma after taking a sleeping pill. It wasn't until he was flown out to the US where he passed away days after. After this incident, the US government decided to ban all American tourists from visiting North Korea. Another reason not to visit this place.
Here at number 7, Sony security breach. The Sony leak has been an embarrassing invasion of privacy for many people, and the things that we found due to it are a little freaky. Because of leaked emails, we learned that everyone hates Adam Sandler, film executives worried over the ending of the new Bond film, and no male executive can confidently watch Shame. Many people immediately suspected North Korea for the leak. Now why, you may ask? Well, because Sony was releasing The Interview, a comedy film about an attempt to assassinate Kim Jong-un. But that seemed like a bit of a stretch. Even the FBI, which was investigating the leak, considered the North Korea connection to be unlikely. But now the film has been cancelled, and the FBI has confirmed that North Korea was centrally involved in the hacks. Maybe change your passwords just in case they manage to do this again.
At our number 6 spot, we have Kidnapped, the South Korean director. A well-known figure in the South Korean film business, Shin Sang-ok, who directed hundreds of movies that were very popular. North Korean spies lured him to Hong Kong in 1976, where they abducted him. He was held rather comfortably for the following 5 years as he was brainwashed. He ultimately saw Kim Jong-il in 1983, at which point he discovered his ex-wife has also been abducted. From there, Shin directed the socialist Godzilla monster movie, Pulgasari. This movie is about a blacksmith worker who was sent to prison for wrongful reasons. From there, he created a tiny monster using rice, and before he passed away, he asked the gods to make this creation into a living creature, hence this Godzilla remake. He did manage to escape North Korea in 1986, but this will always stand as a reminder of one of North Korea's secret abductions.
Halfway at number 5, Museum for American Atrocities. Located in southwest North Korea, the Shincheon Museum of American War Atrocities was reopened in 2014 to pay tribute to the DPRK citizens who brutally passed away during the Shincheon massacre, where up to 35,000 people were systematically massacred over a 3-month period. Except historians can't agree on what actually happened, what role Americans had in the killings as opposed to vengeful South Korean troops. And even if the massacre took place at all, it's likely that the US officer in North blamed for organizing the killings never existed. And many scholars have said the killings were actually committed by communists, eliminating less ideological reliable communists. Whatever really happened at Shincheon, the North clearly blames the US for it. As such, the museum contains dozens of gory exhibits showing Americans torturing, mutilating, and slaughtering innocent DPRK citizens, and the displays are unbelievably graphic and disturbing to many.
All the way at our number 4 spot, we have a war caused by a tree. Yes, a little simple tree led to one of the most devastating wars. The tree was blocking a checkpoint view, which is why the US decided to chop it off in the first place. As you would expect, when the US caught wind that their soldiers passed away in a foreign country, they quickly took action. They created Operation Paul Bunyan, which is named after a mythical lumberjack from North American lore. The operation was very simple: go back to the DMZ and chop it down. Except they came with a little few friends of their own. This included hundreds of soldiers armed with machine guns, grenade launchers, chainsaws, but that wasn't enough. To make this more American, they brought in a 23 vehicle convoy with a tank, 20 utility helicopters, 7 attack helicopters, just in case they thought a few soldiers wasn't enough.
Coming in at our number 3 spot, Camp 22. In the remote northeastern corner of North Korea, close to the border of Russia and China, is Hanyang. Hidden away in the mountains, this remote town is home to Camp 22, North Korea's largest concentration camp, where thousands of men, women, and children accused of political crimes are held. It is also claimed that it's where thousands pass away each year, and where prison guards stamp on the necks of babies born to prisoners to execute them. Over the past year, harrowing first-hand testimonies from North Korean defectors have detailed execution and torture, and evidence has emerged that the walls of Camp 22 hid an even more evil secret: gas chambers where horrific chemical experiments are conducted on people. Witnesses have described watching entire families be put in glass chambers and gassed.
At number 2 spot, we have the poop balloon. Whether it be scary or totally funny, a poop balloon attack was actually done in North Korea. Back in 2016, North Korea conducted their 4th underground nuclear test, and in response to this, South Korea sent a mass of balloons carrying different propaganda on them. They didn't think the North Koreans would play their game, but oh, they definitely did, and changed it up in the worst way possible. They sent an army of balloons filled with used toilet paper, cigarette butts, rotten food, and some propaganda as well. At first, South Korean officials believed that their balloons contained biochemical substances. I mean, if we want to refer to human feces as biochemical, then I'm all about it. Another reason why this small attack happened was because it came at a time when North Korea released information of their very own hydrogen bomb. Just for reference, this is what they look like compared to other atomic bombs.
Coming in at our number 1 spot, Yeonmi Park's story. This story was posted by Yeonmi Park, and it was about how she lived in North Korea and how she eventually managed to escape. She had said, quote, "Our schools and textbooks were full of images of grotesque American GIs with blue eyes and huge noses executing civilians. Sometimes at recess we lined up to beat or stab dummies dressed like American soldiers. Every subject in school came with a dose of propaganda. A math problem would go like this: if you kill one American bastard and your comrade kills 2, how many deceased Americans do you have? There were so many things we were forbidden to do, buy, or sell, and public executions were used to teach lessons in loyalty and the consequences of disobedience. When I was little, a young man was arrested for killing and eating a cow. Cows were the property of the state, and they were too valuable to eat because they were used for plowing fields and dragging carts. This man suffered from tuberculosis and had nothing to eat, but that didn't matter to the police. They took him behind the market and tied him to a piece of wood. 3 men with rifles began firing at him until his body flopped to the ground. My mother watched in shock. She couldn't believe that in her own country, a human's life had less value than an animal's.
At our number 10 spot, we have almost had a war over a tree. 2 US Army officers named Captain Arthur Boniface and First Lieutenant Mark Barrett were axed and butchered until they passed from North Koreans while trying to trim a tree in the DMZ. This would later be known as the Korean Axe Murder Incident. The tree was blocking a checkpoint view, which is why the US decided to chop it in the first place. As you would expect, when the US caught wind that the soldiers passed away in a foreign country, they quickly took action. They created Operation Paul Bunyan, which is named after a mythical lumberjack from North American lore. The operation was very simple: go to the DMZ and chop it down, except they came with a little few friends of their own. This included hundreds of soldiers armed with machine guns, grenade launchers, and chainsaws. And if that wasn't enough to make this more American, they brought in a 23 vehicle convoy with a tank, 20 utility helicopters, and 7 attack helicopters. Oh, you thought I was done? They also brought in B-52s, F-4s, F-5s, F-111s, and also a carrier which was offshore, and a nuclear capable bomber circulating in the area. If you guessed that the North Koreans didn't do anything, you are right. At number 9 spot, we have videos of nuclear destruction. Okay, first things first, North Korea has no internet. Well, except for high level officials and some schools, but that's pretty much it. This means their media spreads like a wildfire in a desert. The only thing that did catch fire is when North Korea featured a video simulation of a nuclear missile striking with what appears to be somewhere in the United States, as you can see the flag burning by the end of the video. This video was unveiled during a military parade marking the 105th birthday of King Il-sung. This video caused a lot of controversies, especially when it came at a time when the tensions were super high between the US and the Hermit State. For reference, this was in 2017, and by that time North Korea had done a ton of missile testing, and to make things more worrisome, North Korea test launched a suspected intercontinental intercontinental ballistic missile into the sea this year. At number 8 spot, we have a betrayal at the death camps. North Korea is known for their cruel punishment and their horrendous living conditions. Put these two together and you have some of the worst death camps in the world. Just to give you a little bit of what happens on the inside, many of the prisoners were kept to the brink of starvation. They are forced to do physical demanding labor for hours, torture, subject to chemical experimentation, and sometimes prisoners would be randomly executed, sometimes because the guard didn't like them. One specific story from the Mirror has Shin Dong-hyuk share his experiences in these death camps. When he was 13 years old, he overheard his mother planning to escape the camp. Since he was practically born on the camp, all he knew was to obey and report anything bad in the eyes of North Korea. So he ratted his mom out. He would then recall watching his mom and his brother being dragged out and publicly executed in front of his very eyes. The worst part about this is that at the time he believed he did good because he claimed this is the type of brainwashing he underwent at the camp. At number 7 spot, we have Otter Warmbier. Warmbier was a student from UCLA and decided it was time to go somewhere outside of the box. He then went on a trip to North Korea through a Chinese company called Young Pioneer Tours, which is still one of the biggest tours to this day. In the hotel he was staying at, there was a forbidden floor, but he went there anyway and stole a political poster off the wall. This was all caught on film. This is all because a church in Hawaii that he was a part of wanted him to do it. During his confession speech on February 2016, he said this:
I have been very impressed by the Korean government's humanitarian treatment of severe criminals like myself, and of their very fair and square legal procedures in the DPR Korea.
This is a load of barnacles.
Then on March that same year, he was convicted and sentenced to 15 years of hard labor. Negotiations happened, but it wasn't until June 2017 when North Korea released Otto. Except he was in a coma after taking a sleeping pill. It wasn't until he was flown out to the US where he passed away. After this incident, the US government decided to ban all American tourists from visiting North Korea altogether. Another reason not to visit this place. At number 6 spot, we have North Korean ghost ships. Hundreds of abandoned boats from North Korea wash up on Japanese and Russian coastlines each year. Some of the vessels contain the crew's remains, but they're usually just a pile of bones. These ghost ships are thought to be the result of North Korean fishermen becoming lost at sea and dying from malnutrition or weather exposure. The ships are typically old and lack stronger engines, and I mean, it's from North Korea. They're pretty much still living in the 1980s still. However, after an investigation was done, they found that these boats were actually sent out from China as a way for them to fish illegally in North Korean waters, which violates UN sanctions completely. Right in the Humper list, we have Ryugyong Hotel. Sorry if I mispronounced that. This 105-star hotel in Pyongyang was completed in 1992, but by that time, it didn't function as a hotel at all. The building was hollowless and had no windows, which meant complete darkness on the inside. Kim Jong-un wanted this hotel to be the biggest and best hotel in the world, but it completely fell short from that goal. It still remains empty to this day. It's literally just a large structure just overlooking the city, and it's more scary to think that no one actually goes into that building. And in fact, this is the world's tallest unoccupied building. Now many theorists have claimed this building isn't empty and it harbors something more sinister inside. This may be a stretch, but online communities have mentioned that SCPs and other governmental projects are being kept secret in this building, hence why it will never truly open up to the public. At number 4 spot, we have Room 39. Room 39 is a secretive North Korean organization that figures out ways to get funds for Kim Jong-un. This room is in a ruling workers' party building in Pyongyang. The main goal of this room is basically to make sure that Kim and his family never run out of funds, and most of these ways are through illegal means. Legally, they invest in many different precious metals and currencies and some companies, but illegally, which is where they make most of their money, they allegedly make their money through means of narcotics, human trafficking, and most famous, counterfeiting money. The North Koreans are so good at creating counterfeit US dollars that they created a super note, which is supposedly 1-for-1 of a US $100 bill. Some people in the US have actually been prosecuted for distributing the money that was produced in this very room. This room also serves as a place for arms dealing, where they usually sell to terrorist organizations and dictators for money. At our number 3 spot, we have Kim Jong-il's tomb. His tomb is on this list because it just gives everyone other than North Koreans the utter creeps. The mausoleum contains the embalmed body of North Korea's late leader Kim Jong-il, and it was open to tourists for some time. During that time, you could see the leader in this glass box with his body resting inside. Just a creepy sight to see in general, let alone a dictator who causes people to suffer. At number 2 spot, we have the Shincheon massacre. Now before I get started with this one is all up for speculation. North Korea has said this happened while the US has said it was falsified, but forget about what we care about, let's just care about the North Korean side right now. They claim that a mass murder took place in the 1950s during the Korean War. In the town of Shincheon, American soldiers supposedly took the lives of over 35,000 civilians civilians in the course of 52 days. If this was true, this would make it one of the most deadliest massacres in history, but that's if. Now this event is memorialized in the Shincheon Museum of American War Atrocities. Yup, there's a museum on horrible violent acts, and some of the paintings in here are pretty disturbing. At our number 1 spot, we have an election. This one is probably the least scariest on this list, but the fact that people have no right to vote for their leaders is definitely terrifying for me at least. Voting in North Korea is actually a thing. When you're supposed to go in for voting, many people show up super early to show a sign of loyalty. But when they're there to vote, it's just mandatory to vote for the SPA party, otherwise known as the Supreme People's Assembly. There's also supposedly private voting booths, but seriously, what do you have to hide? If you do attempt to vote for someone else, the police will follow you and find any ways to incriminate you or declare you insane.